Kevin Foster.
Well, thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. It'll come as no surprise to the Right Honourable Member for Islington North to know that whilst it's a pleasure to follow him, I don't agree with many of the comments he said, or the suggestions he comes up with, though I do agree with him that housing is one of the defining issues, and while I might not agree with his proposed solutions, it is certainly one that we need to address. But in terms of coming to the budget, it is worth looking at the context for the economic picture here in this country. We've had, within this Parliament, we've had a pandemic, which is the first of its nature for a century, and we've had the return of war in Europe, war between nations, for the first time since 1945, with the resulting price shocks that it sent through the world economy. So, there is a need to look at what actually is the context. We're operating in a context that's rarely mentioned when we hear speeches from the other side. And when we look at what the achievements have been, it is an absolutely stunning figure to say 800 new jobs a day created. That unemployment is now lower than it was. Previously, when we've seen big economic shocks, that's seen people ending up unemployed and all the impacts that brings for them and their family. And it's worthwhile looking at the figures that were published yesterday from the DWPs, talking about how economic inactivity rates in the UK are lower than that of the USA, France, Italy, South Korea. We're lower than the G7 and the EU average. These are real people being kept in work, in jobs, that if we hadn't had the interventions that we're now having to pay for during the pandemic, may have been a very, very different picture. And of course, it is worth seeing today's budget in the context of the autumn statement, not least around when we come to the changes on national insurance, probably the largest part of this budget, and that we have seen a £450 on average tax cut for those in work in January, now being followed by another reduction, and also seeing, as someone who wants to see us have lower taxes, give people more of the chance to keep the benefits of their own hard work. It is encouraging to hear some of the comments from the dispatch box earlier about thinking about this issue of the fact that those in work pay a higher tax rate on their income than those who get their income in other ways. That does make an encouraging call. Although I think it be no surprise to the Treasury bench that they'd also expect me to want to mention the fact that there is, I think, an issue about how we look at the tax allowances going forward, particularly thresholds for the basic rate of income tax. Certainly all those employment will of course benefit from the national insurance rates being reduced, but certainly in future I think we need to thought about this, particularly for example those who've saved for a small retirement annuity on top of the state pension, with the effects of the triple lock having seen the state pension rise to protect people against some of the impacts that we've seen in things like price rises. Again, how that will be considered going forward. But it would be remiss not to say about a couple of things that I was fairly pleased to see. And the first one is the rise in the VAT threshold. You can see the impact of the VAT threshold in Torbay fairly clearly. It's the guest house that closes when it's getting close to the threshold. It's the restaurant that literally puts online what day it's going to open each year based on its estimate of when it will hit the threshold through the trading year. That literally is instant growth for the hospitality sector in the Bay around having that threshold raised. I'd also say it's welcome to hear about things like the tax relief on performing arts and theatres being made permanent. Again, I noticed the Ambassador Theatre Group, which is the owner of the largest theatre in Torbay, the Princess, welcoming that going out. And it's also welcome on the alcohol duty-frees as well. Again, Torbay has more than its share of hospitality venues that will benefit and be welcoming that change, alongside the fuel freeze, duty freeze, again, helping people, helping families with their budgets. I'd also say it is very welcome, the change on short-term furnished lets taxation. Whilst things like Airbnb style accommodation has offered choice into the tourism and accommodation market, it's certainly not something we now need to be offering tax breaks for to encourage even further, particularly where we're seeing what were family homes for rent over the long period being converted into holiday accommodation. The Chancellor is right to respond to the calls that have been made to end that particular tax relief. It is not one that was particularly needed. If we are going to give support to the hospitality sector, it is better done via things like targeted business rates reductions or via, as I say, rising of the threshold, which will support all small businesses, not just small businesses of a particular type in the sector. Again, I see this budget in the context of the large support being offered to Torbay's regeneration. We've got over £100 million has been made available by the government to support schemes ranging from the paint and picture houses revival to supporting the Torquay Pavilion to the regeneration of the town centre. But I think the one thing I would end on, mindful of Mr Deputy Speaker's guidance around time length of speeches, is the issue of planning. Now, bringing this up is not about looking to concrete over Greenbelt or other areas, but it is the fact that we do need to reshape our town centres for the future. In many ways, we need to have the type of reshaping of our town centres in the digital age that we had in the late 1940s and early 50s for the mass motoring age, when our towns and cities had to move away from being mostly having horse and carts on the street to having motor vehicles. Now they need to reshape, and the process does take too long. Even schemes that have got wide public support, that have got government funding behind them, can take months to get through the planning process. I think that is an issue that we do need to look at again around stimulating growth and greater prosperity. But overall, Mr Deputy Speaker, this is a budget that will make a positive difference in Torbay. I like the way it's setting a direction towards looking to lower taxes as we can and setting out the clear difference between ourselves wanting to give people the opportunity to keep more of what they earn, to aspire for them and their family, and a party opposite without a plan.